Namaste, I am Umang from Mumbai Tarun Bharat and Policy Advocacy Research Centre, and I welcome you all to Bharatasya Sangeet Vishwanubandh Yatra, an attempt to trace the journey of Indian classical music and instruments in interrelationship with world music. Today, to talk about this, we have with us Abhay Nayyampally. Abhay is one of the very few artists in the world exploring the complex art of Carnatic classical music on the predominantly Western instrument guitar. Abhay is a senior disciple of the legendary mandolin vidwan, late Padma Shri U. Srinivas, and currently is the disciple of legendary violinist Vidushi A. Kanyakumari. Awarded with the title of Sangeet Kalaratnam, he has over 1,000 concerts to his credit, both in India and abroad. Abhay has played with some of the best Indian artists, such as Shankar Mahadevan, Taufik Qureshi, Rakesh Chaurasia, Purbayan Chatterjee, Louis Banks, Ravi Chari, Sridhar Parthasarthi, Aditya Kallanpur, Ojas Adya. His style reflects his reverence and maintenance of undiluted traditional Carnatic classical essence, along with his openness to newer styles of playing, including blues and jazz. So, welcome, Abhayji, and thank you for joining this yatra with us.
Thank you, Umangji. Thank you so much for having me on board.
So, we'll begin with the questions. I would like to ask you, what inspired you to pursue Carnatic music on electric guitar? And how did you get interested in this fusion?
So Carnatic music had been in my life since I was a very young kid. There are recordings of me at the age of 3 or something like that, where my mom, who had trained in Carnatic classical in her youth, was teaching me a song. But then after that, I kind of lost touch with Carnatic in the sense of learning it. I went into other things like Western classical, I went into jazz, and I did that professionally for a little while. And then I kind of wanted to, I was looking for my own pathway, I was looking for my own journey. And that's where it all struck me that, the sound that I'd always loved, one of the most beautiful things about Carnatic music is its sound, is its very distinct language. And I'd grown up listening to it, and I thought, okay, you know what, why don't I try this on the guitar? It was quite an uphill task at that point of time, but it was a beautiful journey. I would say it still is a beautiful journey. It's an ongoing thing, the learning process. But that's how I decided to kind of switch over at that point of time. I kind of switched abruptly from whatever I was doing back then to Carnatic music. The reason being, we have so many people who play jazz or blues, Western classical across the globe, and I would just be one of those, drops in the ocean. But I wanted to see if I could take our music, our rich Carnatic traditional, classical music, and take it to the world on an instrument that the world has given to India. I mean, the guitar has come from the West to India, and I thought I'll give something back. I'll try to give something back to the West on their own instruments. So that was a little bit of the philosophy of switching over to Carnatic music.
Now, I would like to ask you, since you chose the electric guitar to be your instrument, how does electric guitar differ from traditional Carnatic instruments like the veena or the violin in terms of sound and technique?
One thing is, the electric guitar it's a predominantly Western instrument. It was made with Western music in mind. It was never made with Carnatic in mind. But then the same could be said of even the violin, which today is like a staple instrument, like how we have the harmonium in the Hindustani classical music, which also happens to interestingly be a German reed instrument. So the harmonium is a staple of Hindustani music. The violin is a staple of Carnatic music, but the violin also is a European instrument, and it was only brought into the Carnatic fold around 250, 300 years ago by the legendary composer Muthuswami Dikshita's father. And so the way I see it, there is a universality in all of these instruments, So it may originate in one place geographically or in the context of one particular kind of music, but you never know what kind of journey the instrument itself ends up taking, because like we know the mandolin is, and it was like a folk instrument in Europe, and today we had the legendary U Srinivas ji, who I was very, very, fortunate and blessed to get the opportunity to learn from. He took that instrument and turned it into a Carnatic instrument, and we all know where that journey led and how beautiful that journey has been. And so the way I see it, the guitar, even though it's a Western instrument, with the application of certain techniques and with the application of certain aesthetics and rules or whatever you call it, you can actually end up playing pure Carnatic on it, even without any modifications to the guitar.
Thank you, Abhayji. My next question to you would be, how do you balance the traditional elements of Carnatic music with the modern sound of electric guitar? And what techniques do you use to fuse these two styles together?
That's a beautiful question. Thank you. That's actually what I do. Is I don't use too many of the frills that come with having an electric guitar, because nowadays, and as technology goes forward, we have so many choices of amplifiers and pedals and VSTs and what have you. So the choice is endless. But I kind of simplify it. I keep it to just a bare minimum clean electric guitar tone, so that the beauty of the music actually is focused on, rather than all the other paraphernalia that goes along with it. At the most, I'll use probably like a delay reverb just to add to it. But I have done concerts in the past where I've not used even that. So the idea being, can you do like a 3-hour concert? Can you keep an audience engaged with just an absolutely raw tone of a guitar, simply by the power of the music itself? Because the music itself is so strong that you don't need anything else to get that power across. So the tone that I keep is very minimal, so that it focuses on just the music itself. So in that way, the traditionality of the music, the aesthetic of the music, the sound signature of the music is not tampered with too much. When it comes to the technique of playing, of course, it's very different from the way a Western guitar is played. Even though the instrument that I'm playing has not been modified in any way regarding the body, nor the strings, nor the tuning, nothing is modified. So you could actually play this, like you can just walk into a store, pick up any guitar there, and you can start playing pure Carnatic on it. That was the idea when I started off. So it's just the technique of playing that is different, where you as people who have heard Carnatic music know, it's a very gamaka based, it's a very ornamentation based music. So we do those slides on strings, we do those gamakas and all of that, and that's how we get the expression out. It's which is slightly different from playing maybe say jazz or blues or rock on the guitar.
Now, I would like to ask you, what unique challenges have you faced in adapting Carnatic music to the electric guitar, and how did you overcome them?
Um, I think the only challenge would be the challenge that any artist would go through. Like whether it's learning even say a traditional instrument like a mritangam or a veena or a flute, or these are instruments that have kind of been associated with Carnatic music for centuries. But the instruments like say saxophone, violin, and guitar, mandolin, clarinet, etc., even keyboard nowadays. I mean, Carnatic is played even on keyboard nowadays, and I think The challenge only is to try and keep the music as pure as possible without, deviating too much from the general language of the music, general sound, the general feel, the aesthetic, the rules of the music. There are certain rules that we uh, parameters within which we play. So without tampering with any of those, if we can, make the music speak, that is the main challenge. But otherwise, other than that, adapting Carnatic to a guitar, I really didn't think of it as a challenge because it was just something you do. I mean, it's a naturally difficult learning curve, just like any other instrument. I mean, I was just thinking of like, okay, if I had to learn how to play the mridangam, or if I had to learn how to play the veena, this is the kind of effort that I would have to put in. So I'm just trying to do that on a guitar. So I, very honestly speaking, I did not think about how difficult it would be to adapt Carnatic music to the instrument. It was just a matter of, okay, this gamaka, if it's not sounding correct, what can I do to correct it? It was just taking it one day at a time, one note at a time, one raga at a time. It was the process was like that, and it was a day-to-day process, and it's a process that still goes on. It's I mean, as any musician can probably vouch for, it's a lifelong thing where you just you keep trying to improve, you keep trying to play better than what you did yesterday. So that goes on and on. But in terms of just taking a Western instrument and adapting it to Carnatic style, I didn't think of it too much from that point of view. I was just, if I want it to sound like this, I'm going to try
Mhm.
and do this. That's all that it was, to be very honest.
So, have you made any changes to this instrument to be
No,
accustomed to Carnatic music?
no, not at all. The idea, I mean, when I first started off, the idea itself was to be able to just walk into any store and play the guitar in a Carnatic style. The guitar has always been one of my favorite instruments because of the way it is, the way it holds, the way it makes me feel personally. So I didn't want to alter that in any way. I didn't want to make any kind of changes to that instrument because I feel it's perfect in its own way. I mean, I the guitar that I prefer to play for Carnatic music is a Fender Stratocaster, and a lot of different people play different things. This is one that I personally like, and I feel it's best suited for Carnatic. And the instrument itself is designed and crafted and executed so beautifully that I felt, I don't want to make any changes to this. I had, like, in one of my first ever lessons with Srinivas ji back then, I had asked him, should I switch to a Carnatic tuning, which is a sa tuning, which is what he uses. And he said, can you play in the standard tuning? Like, will you be able to learn this in the standard tuning? Because you will have an immense advantage if you learn to play it in the standard tuning, because you won't have to keep retuning. You'll be able to play in any key. You won't have to retune your instrument and every time you change your key. So that was one of the, it was one of the most precious bits of advice that I had got from him back then, and I am still thankful that he nudged me in that direction, because then today, um, I kind of formulated a system where you play pure Carnatic in a standard Western guitar tuning.
So, without changing the anatomy of the instrument, you just adapted the musical style onto that instrument. Can you
Yeah, yeah.
walk us through the process of you arranging and composing Carnatic music on an electric guitar?
Uh, so when it comes to composing, I'm guessing you mean my own compositions, because there are certain traditional compositions also which exists, which we don't kind of tamper with too much, other than bringing our own expression to it. But when it comes to my own compositions, I try to just go with how the raga sounds, how the raga should sound
Mhm.
in my head at that perfect point. There's always that Goldilocks point, like where it's never up or it's never down. It's just right. So whenever it hits that particular spot in my head, it's very difficult to describe it because it's very subjective. But that's how I go about it. So even in the album that I done a couple of years ago, that was the philosophy that I was using. Is this phrase sounding to me in a way that I would not change it later? If it sticks, then I go with it. If it doesn't stick, then I tweak it in whatever way it is required to be tweaked. Yeah.
And while composing and while playing original compositions, which is your most favorite raga? And if you were to think, what has that raga given you?
Very difficult question. Because there are so many that are, that connect on so many different levels, and each one has its own beauty, and each one has its own uh, feel and mood. But I think I, one of the ragas that I do have a very, very special soft corner for is Hansadvani. It's, I mean, everyone loves that raga. It's a very happy raga. But for me, it has a significance because my journey to play Carnatic music literally started overnight, and I mean literally overnight. Because there was one I had the habit of sitting and practicing at night, late at night. I'm a nocturnal person, so I still do that. So I remember one night when I was just practicing some guitar, and I thought, okay, why don't I try some Carnatic on this? Because I had been mulling over the idea for a long time. And obviously, whatever I played back then must have sounded quite horrible. But the raga that I tried to play was Hamsadvani. The first ever raga that I tried to play on a guitar was Hamsadvani. So I do have that, soft corner for it. It's got a sentimental value to it. But apart from that, of course, I really love playing ragas like Charukeshi and Varuna Priya, or Todi. These are, like, some of the Carnatic ragas, because they have a kind of emotion that it's very difficult to capture or get a parallel for this kind of an emotion in any other form of music, and I get that here. And that's why I love playing these ragas. It's a very standalone kind of, you know uh, I won't say piece of music,
Mhm.
emotion. I guess emotion would be the best way to put it.
And if you were to think, what has Hamsadvani given you
Oh,
in
so
terms
much.
of you as an artist, a person? Yeah.
So much, because like, coincidentally, I hadn't mentioned this to my guru the first time I went to him, but the first raga that he ended up teaching me was Hamsadvani. Very, very coincidentally, I don't know what to call it, serendipitously, it just so happened that the composition that he taught me was the very composition that my mother had taught me when I was 3 years old. So the recording that I have, which happens to be a famous Carnatic Kriti, Vatapi Ganapatim, to
Mm.
those who listen to Carnatic music, they'll be very familiar with this, of course. It's a composition of Muthuswami Dikshitar. And I don't know how he chose that composition. And he just said, okay, let's do Vatapi Ganapatim in that first ever lesson that I did with him in Chennai. And it it completely, changed the way I looked at everything. It completely changed the way I looked at music, heard music, saw it in my head, saw it on the instrument, all of that. So even to this day, I don't know about others, but I tend to look at a raga on a fretboard, and then I mean, I'm not actually looking physically at the fretboard, but in my head I can see, the fretboard. So every time I look at Hamsadvani in my head, it has something new to offer. It has something new and beautiful to offer. So it's always fresh. It's always refreshing. It's an ongoing journey, and I love what it keeps teaching me every single time, because that's what you do as an artist. You just, every day is just about learning. That's all it is.
Now, moving on to your performances, how do you approach improvisation in your Carnatic music performances on the electric guitar? And what techniques do you use to create new melodic phrases and motifs?
Uh, that's also another beautiful question. Thanks. So Carnatic improvisation has its own, method. There's a very definite approach to Carnatic improvisation. So within the parameters of which we try to take explore the ragas. But it also always depends on so many other factors, like how the audience is responding. You kind of always, as an artist, you feed off the energy of the audience. You see how that is going, you see how a particular raga is affecting a particular audience. And then after that, it all comes down to how the raga itself kind of leads you within its own alleyways. So the way I look at a raga, at least, is I look at a raga as, say, like a town or a city. Every time you go, you discover a new alleyway, and then you go into that alley, and then you discover further by lanes, and that's how you just go on exploring the raga. So you don't know where you're going to end up. So you don't go into it with a particular mindset. You just kind of keep yourself open, and you just start playing, and then you find out that, oh, okay, this is where it's going, oh, this is where it's going. And as much as you are a player, you are an audience member too, because sometimes you end up hearing a phrase which you didn't even practice, or which you didn't even know could be played with this raga. And it's like it's a fantastic moment, because you're like, oh, okay, even this happens with the raga, so this is nice. So you kind of try to remember it, and then you go home, and then you try to expand it more. But there's no audience then, so you can't really feed off any energy there except yourself. But it's, yeah, that's how a raga goes.
That's amazing. Being an audience to yourself also is very meditative, as I've heard from various musicians that I've interviewed till now.
Yeah, I think most musicians would agree. I mean, much as our profession and is dependent on playing to an audience, and all of that, and we do love it. We do love. I mean, if there's no one to listen to you, then it's very difficult for a musician. But at the same time, it's very weird, because some of the most beautiful and tender moments we have with our music is when we are by ourselves. When we're just sitting and playing by ourselves, you end up playing stuff that you don't even realize how long a certain thing could go, or where it could go, or it's very assertive. Yeah.
And further to ask you, which is your most memorable performance till date, and which is your most fulfilling performance till date?
Oh, there've been a lot of memorable concerts. I I remember two concerts that I would like to mention here. One of them was a concert that we'd done through NCPA. We had gone as a band called Samarpan, and we had gone to Macau, next to Hong Kong, and there was a festival there where youngsters from all over Asia had come to present their music, and it was such a proud moment for us to be able to present our own music. So we had a fusion band. It was not a pure classical thing, but it was fusion. So we had elements of jazz, we had elements of Hindustani classical, we had elements of Carnatic classical, and to just be able to uh, present that thing, that sound, to an audience of very keen and very interested listeners, very energetic listeners from all across, you know, Asia. And like, we had so many nationalities sitting there: Chinese people, Japanese, Russians, we had people from Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, all of that. And nobody had heard something like what we had done. And they were all very, very excited to hear it. So that was one of the most memorable concerts. Another memorable concert that I'd had was, in fact, it was not even in an auditorium, it was in someone's house.
Yeah.
I was invited to play for a Griha Pravesh ceremony. Like, the ceremony, for those who don't know, Griha Pravesh, it's where you are just moving into a new home, and you have a ceremony to kind of make
So
that an
great one.
auspicious.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Entry.
So I was called to play a Carnatic solo for that. And I remember we started playing at 5 in the evening, and I was supposed to play for about 2 hours. But all of us, including the audience, got so carried away by the music that I remember we ended up playing without a break. for 4 hours 45 minutes.
Wow.
So we ended the concert around 9:45, and when we looked at the time, we were like shocked because we thought it was like around 7:30 or something, but it was 9:45. So, and we didn't even realize how time just flew. So I remember feeling very goosebumpy about that because I realized that's what music can do to you. It completely takes away your sense of time, your sense of space, everything. You're just somewhere else. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
that is, yeah, these are some of the most memorable. Of course, there are many with like so many legendary artists I was very fortunate to share a stage with. So all of them come to mind when I think of this, but these two kind of were at the top of my head when you asked that question. So
Lovely. Now, I'd like to ask you, who are your musical influences, both in Carnatic and other genres?
in Carnatic music, definitely the music of my legendary master, U. Srinivas ji. So a lot of what I do, the language of what I play, is all inspired by his beautiful music. Um, I'm also a big fan of Lalgudi Jayaraman sir, his violin, T.N. Krishnan sir, his violin. Of course, the beautiful Veena of S. Balachandar ji, the beautiful vocals of G.N. Balasubramaniam, S. Kalyanarama, and Semangudi Srinivasa. These are all people that I grew up listening to and, have had a lot of influence on what I do today. But apart from them, of course, there are a lot of musicians outside of, the realm of Carnatic music that I am very grateful to have just gotten the opportunity of listening to, like John McLaughlin. And these are people who've had a lot of influence on me: the John McLaughlin, Bill Evans, and uh, Pat Metheny. And I love Western classical music, so a lot of Beethoven, Mozart, Bach, Claude Debussy. All of these have had a lot of impact on my own personal journey. Whether or not I actually play that kind of music, but the kind of influences that and the kind of approach that they've had to their music has been very inspiring to study and to try and replicate, or to try and bring that about in my own journey. It's something that I'm so glad that I got to listen to all this kind of beautiful music. That's
Wow, that is wonderful. And to conclude, I'd like to ask you, how do you see the impact of Indian classical music? Now we're talking about both Hindustani and Carnatic as a whole, Indian classical music on world music.
I think it's already had tremendous impact and it continues to have. We are so fortunate to be part of this tradition,
Mhm.
whether it's Hindustani or whether it's Carnatic music.
Mhm.
For so many decades now, starting with, I mean, people, legends like Pandit Ravi Shankar ji, and uh, all of them took Indian classical music to a Western audience and introduced them. Even my guru, Srinivas ji, also did so many concerts abroad, and so many Western audiences and Far Eastern audiences also.
Mhm.
They were so mesmerized by the quality of Indian classical.
Mhm.
And that's one thing that really fascinates me, is the universality of music. You don't need to understand something to be able to enjoy it or to be able to be moved by it. There are people, um, uh, like there are people who have been in tears, like Western audiences, listening to our concerts and have been in tears, and they come and tell after the concert, like, we don't understand what you did, we have no idea what it even means, but it was just so moving. So it's already always had an impact on Western audiences wherever it's got an opportunity to present itself. Wherever on the earth it's got an opportunity to present itself. And I think it'll continue to do that because now the world is getting smaller and smaller because of the internet, and we're able to collaborate with so many artists abroad, and it's just become so much easier to connect, and to bring so many different elements together, and to be able to go out there, perform, or to get artists in and perform with them. discuss their music, get to learn from them, and they get to learn from us. And it's all very, very, we live in very interesting times, I feel. So I think the impact of Indian classical is always going to be very strong on world music, because the music itself is so powerful. And it's the beauty of this is it's actually so simple, because you don't need anything. You just need one tanpura, and you can sit and you can do a concert for 4 hours, and you can still hold an audience. That is absolutely powerful. That is a kind of power that I've not seen, I've rarely seen, rather. So I think we are very, very fortunate to be part of this tradition, and to be able to influence, or to, take this forward to a Western audience or a Far Eastern audience, or whichever audience outside of India. I think it. I think it's very significant. I think we are very fortunate to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And we are glad that you do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sure.
Thank you. So this was Abhay Nayyampally, a
Thank you
Carnatic
so much.
electric guitar player, and he shared his experience and his learnings from his experience throughout his playing career and journey. And it was really wonderful to have you here on board on Bharatasya Sangeet Vishwanubandh Yatra. I sincerely thank you for joining us and letting us into your world of Carnatic music on a Western instrument. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.